My friends, there are moments in history when nations shake, when emotions run high, when anger rises like a storm across the land. In those moments, people look at leaders, governments, and political figures, and their hearts fill with frustration, fear, or even hatred. And in one of those moments, something struck my spirit. When people look at leaders, they often expect perfection. They expect strength without weakness, wisdom without mistakes, courage without flaws. But history tells a different story. Again and again, the people who were used to change the course of nations were not perfect individuals. They were human, complicated, sometimes rough, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes deeply flawed. Yet somehow, in the middle of their imperfections, something greater moved through them. That truth can be difficult for people to accept, because we want heroes who are spotless. We want leaders who never stumble, never say the wrong thing, never carry controversy. But the reality of history and the reality of faith is that God has often chosen the unexpected. There were shepherds who became kings. There were fishermen who became voices that shook empires. There were people who doubted, people who struggled, people who failed before they ever succeeded. And yet their imperfections did not stop the greater purpose unfolding around them. Sometimes those very imperfections were part of the story. In our modern world, emotions rise quickly when we talk about leaders. Opinions become intense, debates become heated, and people often divide into camps of admiration or anger. When the name of Donald Trump comes up, the reactions can be immediate and powerful. For some, he represents strength and disruption of the old system. For others, he represents controversy and frustration. The reactions are strong on both sides, but what if the deeper question is not simply about the leader? What if the deeper question is about what these moments reveal about us? Throughout history, moments of upheaval have often served as mirrors. They reveal the fears inside societies. They reveal the anger, the hopes, the divisions that were already there beneath the surface. Leaders can become symbols in those moments, symbols that amplify what people already carry in their hearts. And that is where something profound begins to unfold. Because when a flawed leader rises, people are forced to confront something uncomfortable. The realization that history is not shaped by perfect individuals. It is shaped by complex human beings navigating turbulent times. Sometimes those individuals disrupt systems that have grown stagnant. Sometimes they force conversations that people were avoiding. Sometimes they create chaos that reveals deeper truths hidden beneath the surface of a nation. None of that means a leader is perfect. It simply reminds us that imperfection has never stopped history from moving forward. If anything, imperfection is one of the most consistent themes in the story of humanity. Think about it for a moment. If God only worked through perfect people, nothing in history would ever have happened. No leader would qualify. No movement would begin. No transformation would take place. Instead, time and time again, imperfect individuals stepped into moments larger than themselves. Sometimes they stumbled. Sometimes they surprised everyone. Sometimes they changed the direction of events in ways no one predicted. And in those moments, people watching history unfold are faced with a choice. They can become consumed with anger and resentment toward the person in front of them, or they can step back and ask a deeper question. What might this moment be revealing about our society, about our fears, about our values, and even about ourselves? Because the story of imperfect leaders is not just about those leaders. It is also about the people who are watching, reacting, and shaping the future with their own hearts. There is something that quietly grows inside the human heart when anger is left unchecked. It begins small, almost unnoticed. A feeling of frustration, a moment of resentment, a sense that someone has wronged you or your nation or your beliefs. At first, it feels justified. It feels righteous. It feels like standing for what is right. But if that feeling is fed day after day, argument after argument, headline after headline, it slowly transforms into something heavier, something darker, hatred. Hatred rarely announces itself at the beginning. It disguises itself as passion. It hides inside strong opinions. It whispers that your anger is necessary, that your bitterness is justified, that the other side deserves your contempt. And before a person realizes it, that poison begins to shape how they see the world. It changes the way they listen. It changes the way they speak. It changes the way they treat other human beings. You can see it everywhere in times of political conflict. Conversations that once would have been disagreements become personal attacks. Friends stop speaking to one another. Families argue across dinner tables. Communities fracture into opposing camps where each side begins to see the other not as people, but as enemies. When the name of Donald Trump is mentioned, emotions often explode instantly. Some react with deep loyalty, others react with deep anger, and the reaction itself becomes more powerful than the discussion. That is when something dangerous begins to happen. The conversation stops being about ideas or policies. It stops being about solving problems. Instead, it becomes about defeating, humiliating, or silencing the other side. And in that moment, the heart begins to lose something precious, because hatred has a strange power. It convinces people that they are fighting for justice, while quietly draining the compassion out of their souls. It makes people feel strong, while actually making them smaller inside. It promises satisfaction, but leaves behind exhaustion and emptiness. A person can spend hours every day consuming anger, scrolling through arguments, watching outrage, feeding their frustration. But when the noise fades and the room becomes quiet, something inside still feels unsettled. That is because the human heart was never meant to carry that much bitterness. You can disagree strongly with someone. You can challenge ideas, protest decisions, and demand accountability. Those things are part of healthy societies, but hatred is different. Hatred goes beyond disagreement. It begins to dehumanize. And the moment we stop seeing others as human beings, we step into dangerous territory. History has shown this again and again. Some of the darkest chapters of human history began when people allowed anger and division to grow unchecked. When leaders became symbols of absolute good or absolute evil in the minds of their followers, when compassion disappeared and was replaced with rage. But there is another path. It begins with recognizing what anger is doing inside your own heart. It begins with stepping back from the endless cycle of outrage and asking yourself a simple question. Is this making me a better person, or is it slowly hardening me? Because no matter how intense the political storm becomes, protecting the condition of your heart remains one of the most important choices you will ever make. You can stand for your beliefs without becoming consumed by hatred. You can speak strongly without poisoning your spirit. And sometimes the greatest strength a person can show in a divided world is the quiet refusal to let bitterness take control of their soul. There are moments in history when the surface of society becomes turbulent. The debates become louder, the arguments sharper, the divisions deeper. It begins to feel as if everything is about politics, as if every conversation, every news story, every social media post is part of an endless political battle. But if you step back for a moment and look beyond the noise, something deeper begins to appear. Because many times what we call a political conflict is actually revealing a much deeper struggle happening beneath the surface of society. Throughout history, times of intense political division often reflected something spiritual happening within the hearts of people. It was not only about laws, policies, or elections. It was about fear, identity, morality, purpose, and the direction a nation believed it should move toward. These are not just political questions. They are deeply spiritual questions about values and meaning. When societies begin to argue intensely about their future, it often means people feel that something important is at stake. People feel that the soul of their nation is being challenged or transformed. And when people believe something sacred is on the line, emotions rise quickly. That is why the conflicts can feel so personal. When the name of Donald Trump is mentioned, the reactions are rarely calm or neutral. For some, his rise represented a rejection of old political systems and a call for dramatic change. For others, it represented a challenge to the values and stability they believed their country needed. The reactions were not just political disagreements. They carried deep emotional and moral weight for millions of people. And that is exactly what happens when political moments intersect with deeper questions about identity and purpose. It becomes a kind of mirror reflecting the spiritual state of a society. Fear begins to rise in some hearts. Hope rises in others. Anger grows in certain corners while determination grows in others. Communities begin to ask themselves who they really are and what they truly believe. These moments can be uncomfortable, even chaotic. They can create confusion and tension that spreads through families, workplaces, and entire nations. But they also reveal something important. They reveal what people are holding inside their hearts. Some people respond to turmoil with courage and reflection. They ask deeper questions. They listen carefully. They search for wisdom before reacting. Others respond with rage, suspicion, and hostility, convinced that anyone who disagrees with them must be an enemy. That difference in response is where the deeper battle truly takes place, because the real struggle is not simply about who wins an election or which party gains power. The deeper struggle is about the kind of people we become during these moments of conflict. Do we allow fear to control our thinking? Do we allow anger to shape our character? Do we allow division to turn neighbors into enemies? Or do we step back and recognize that something larger is unfolding, something that calls for patience, humility, and clarity? Every generation faces moments like this, moments when the noise becomes overwhelming and the future feels uncertain. But these moments also offer a chance for reflection. They ask every individual a quiet but powerful question: what is guiding your heart in the middle of the storm? Because while political battles eventually fade and new leaders rise, the spiritual condition of a society, the compassion, wisdom, and integrity within its people, is what ultimately shapes the future. And in the end, that deeper battle is the one that matters most. There are seasons in history when everything feels unsettled. The news becomes overwhelming, conversations grow tense, and people begin to feel as if the ground beneath them is shifting. In moments like these, many people only see chaos. They see conflict, controversy, and uncertainty. But sometimes difficult seasons carry a deeper message, one that people often miss, because they are too focused on the noise. Hard moments have a strange way of waking people up. When life is comfortable and predictable, many people move through their days without asking deeper questions. They follow routines, chase goals, and assume tomorrow will look much like today. But when a nation enters a turbulent season, when arguments erupt everywhere and the future feels uncertain, something begins to stir inside people. They start asking questions they ignored before. What kind of country are we becoming? What do we really believe in? What values truly matter? Those questions are not just political questions. They are moral and spiritual questions. They push people to reflect on their priorities, their convictions, and the direction of their society. History has shown that moments of disruption often force nations to examine themselves in ways they never would during peaceful times. Comfort rarely pushes people to change, but crisis often does. When political storms rise around figures like Donald Trump, people often focus entirely on the personality at the center of the controversy. The debates become about the individual, his words, his actions, his supporters, his critics. But sometimes the greater story is not about one person at all. Sometimes the real story is about what the moment is revealing. A nation begins to see its own divisions more clearly. Hidden frustrations rise to the surface. Voices that once felt ignored begin to speak loudly. Other voices respond with fear or resistance. Suddenly, the entire society is forced to confront tensions that may have been building quietly for years. And in the middle of that tension, something unexpected can happen. People begin to realize that the future of their society cannot simply depend on politicians. It depends on the character of the people themselves. It depends on whether individuals choose wisdom over anger, humility over pride, understanding over constant hostility. Turbulent times can become turning points if people are willing to reflect instead of only react. Instead of asking only who is right and who is wrong, people can ask deeper questions. What kind of society do we want to build? What kind of conversations do we want to have? What kind of values will guide us forward? These moments can become wake-up calls. They remind people that democracy, community, and shared values require more than voting or arguing online. They require patience, listening, and the willingness to recognize that no society moves forward if its citizens are consumed by endless outrage. Sometimes the shock of a turbulent political era is what pushes people to rediscover those truths. They begin to understand that the real strength of a nation is not just its leaders, but the maturity, compassion, and responsibility of its people. Difficult seasons do not last forever. History moves forward, new leaders appear, and the intensity of one moment eventually fades. But the lessons people learn during those seasons can shape the future for generations. And perhaps the deepest message hidden inside turbulent times is this: when everything around us feels uncertain, it is an opportunity to pause, reflect, and choose what kind of people we will become moving forward. There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize that holding on to bitterness is exhausting. At first, anger can feel powerful. It feels like fuel, like a force that keeps you alert and ready to fight for what you believe is right. But over time, that same anger begins to weigh on the heart like a heavy stone. Bitterness does not just stay in the mind. It slowly spreads into every part of a person's life. It changes the way you wake up in the morning. It changes how you react to people around you. It even changes the way you see strangers you have never met. When resentment settles deeply inside the heart, the world begins to look darker than it really is. Many people carry wounds they rarely talk about. Some feel betrayed by leaders they once trusted. Others feel ignored by systems they believed would protect them. Some feel angry about decisions that shaped their lives in painful ways. Over time, those feelings build walls inside the heart. The problem is that bitterness rarely stays focused on the original source of pain. It spreads outward, touching everything. Conversations become sharper, patience becomes shorter, compassion becomes harder to feel. In the middle of intense political debates, this bitterness often becomes even stronger. When people hear the name of Donald Trump, emotions can immediately rush to the surface. Some people feel loyalty and admiration, while others feel frustration or anger. But regardless of which side someone stands on, the emotional weight can become overwhelming if it turns into constant resentment. The human heart was never designed to carry endless bitterness. Holding on to resentment may feel like protecting yourself, but in reality, it slowly drains your peace. It keeps your mind tied to the same frustrations again and again. It replays the same arguments in your head long after the conversation has ended. Instead of freeing you, it traps you inside a cycle of emotional tension. Healing begins with something that sounds simple but is often incredibly difficult: letting go. Letting go does not mean ignoring injustice or pretending problems do not exist. It does not mean abandoning your beliefs or your convictions. Instead, it means refusing to let anger dominate your heart. It means choosing not to allow resentment to define who you are. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. Many people think forgiveness means declaring that someone was right, or that the harm they caused did not matter. But real forgiveness is something different. It is a decision to release the emotional grip that pain has on your spirit. It is a way of saying, "I will not let this bitterness control my life anymore." That decision can feel incredibly freeing. When people begin to release resentment, they often discover a sense of peace they had forgotten was possible. Their thoughts become clearer, their relationships improve, their ability to listen and understand others grows stronger. Healing the heart is not a single moment. It is a process. It requires patience with yourself. It requires honesty about the emotions you are carrying. Sometimes it requires quiet reflection, prayer, or simply stepping away from the constant stream of arguments and outrage that fills modern life. But the reward for that effort is profound. When bitterness finally loosens its grip, the heart becomes lighter. Hope begins to return. Compassion becomes possible again. And instead of being trapped in anger about the past, a person can begin to focus on building something better for the future. There are moments in life when fear tries to take control of everything we think and feel. It creeps in quietly at first, through uncertainty, through headlines, through endless debates that make the future seem darker than it really is. The more people hear conflict and chaos around them, the more fear begins to whisper that everything is falling apart. Fear has a powerful voice. It tells people that their future is in danger, that their values are under attack, that everything they care about could disappear. And when fear grows strong enough, it can make people react in ways they never expected. It can make them angry, defensive, and suspicious of anyone who thinks differently. But faith is different from fear. Faith does not mean ignoring reality or pretending problems do not exist. Faith means believing that even in difficult moments, there is still hope, there is still purpose, and there is still a path forward. It is the quiet strength that allows a person to stand in the middle of uncertainty without losing their peace. During turbulent political seasons, fear often spreads quickly. People begin to believe that everything depends on the outcome of one election or the actions of one leader. They begin to feel as though the future of the world rests entirely on a single moment in history. When the name of Donald Trump enters conversations, those fears can intensify for many people. Some fear the changes he represents, while others fear the opposition against him. Each side believes something precious is at risk. The tension grows, and the fear feeds